Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the state of the race of the 2024 presidential election as of May this month. This is going to be updated and basically rematch between incumbent President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. And we're going to be taking a look at what the polling averages say currently as of the month of May. But before we get started, make sure you guys are subscribed and click the bell so you don't miss out on any of my content. And also, we have memberships, so if you are interested in that, you can find a link to that in the description section. Back to the topic of today's video. I'm going to be filling out the electoral map based off of the latest polling averages from the month of May. Starting off with the state of Ohio, current polling averages currently, as you can see right here, has Donald Trump winning this state by roughly 13%. Now that's polls alone, but when you factor in other things, the margin gets a little bit closer, but still Trump comfortably wins it by a safe margin of double digits. He's up by 11.5 points. So whether it's 11 or 13%, it doesn't really matter. Donald Trump is poised to comfortably win the state of Ohio in 2024. The state overall has just shifted too far to the right for it to be even somewhat close or competitive at this point in time. And now, as for the state of Iowa, this state has also gone too far to the right for Joe Biden to even be competitive at all in this state. Donald Trump, according to polling averages, is on track to win Iowa by roughly 10 to 11% on average. And with that being said, he's comfortably going to win this state again, just like as for Ohio, by a safe margin in the state of Iowa. And then as for the state of Colorado, current polling averages as of May suggest that Biden is on track to have a big win in the state of Colorado. Current polling averages has him up in the state by roughly 9%. But when you take a look at the projected margin, which is when you factor in other things like betting markets and expert ratings, for example, Biden's margin actually increases. So with that being said, Biden's going to comfortably win the state of Colorado in 2024. And keep in mind, with that being said, actually, Democrats have seen gains in terms of voter registration by roughly 4,000 new voters in favor of Democrats in the state of Colorado. So it's going to shift the state to the left, even though it's already pretty much a comfortable Democratic state. It's still a left trendy state. And then as for the southeastern state of Florida, Republicans have also seen gains in terms of voter registration. When you take a look at the 2020 election, for example, Democrats led in terms of voting registration by 97,000. And now, you fast forward 4 years later in 2024, Republicans are leading significantly by 888,000 in terms of voter registration. So the polls are reflecting exactly that. Current polling averages as of May suggest that Trump is going to win the state by double digits of 12%, which is a safe margin at this point in time. So with that being said, Florida is not even going to be close for Joe Biden in the 2024 election. And now as for the Sunbelt state of Texas, current polling averages has Donald Trump winning this state on average by 11% at the current moment, and which is greater than his 2020 margin. He won this state by roughly 5.5 points back in the 2020 election. So that's already a 5-point swing to the right. And considering the main cause for this is probably the border crisis, obviously. Texas, as we all know, is a border state. So it's going to be impacted and affected by this issue. And considering that the number one issue Joe Biden is struggling on the most out of any other happens to be immigration, that's only going to go in favor of Donald Trump in this state. So Texas is going to be safe for Donald Trump. He's going to win it by double digits according to current polling averages. And now as for the state of New Mexico, polls suggest that Joe Biden is comfortably going to win New Mexico in 2024. He's up in this state by roughly 8.5%, considered a likely margin. So Biden is still comfortably going to win both New Mexico and Colorado, but New Mexico is going to be slightly more competitive and closer than a state like Colorado would be. So Biden's going to win it by a likely margin. And now as for the districts, we haven't filled out these districts, so to get them out of the way, starting off with Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, Joe Biden is going to win that by a lean margin according to current polling averages as of the month of May. Moving up to Maine's 2nd congressional district, Donald Trump is comfortably going to win this by a likely to safe margin according to majority of polling averages. And then Maine's at-large is actually likely for Biden instead of safe. He's only winning it by roughly in between 7 to 10%. Which is a big, swing to the right. than where it was back in 2020, even though Joe Biden is still going to win Maine's at-large. It's just a little bit closer because the main cause is probably because we have a large third-party vote share, and it's going to make it a little bit closer, and that will take away some votes away from Biden. And so Maine's at-large will be closer because of the major third-party candidates: Cornel West, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Jill Stein. Moving on to the state of New Hampshire, Biden, according to majority polling average, is actually polling pretty decent, above average in what he's polling in any other swing state. Really, New Hampshire is probably one of the brighter news for the Biden campaign, in which he's up by roughly 6 to 7%, which is arguably a likely margin at the end of the day. And you compare this to, for example, a state like Wisconsin or a state like Arizona, in which Trump is leading in terms of polls. And so, considering that New Hampshire, according to the polls, has Biden up by almost 7 points, it's pretty good news for Joe Biden, as he's comfortably going to win the state according to majority averages. And now moving on to the state of Virginia. Current polling averages has Joe Biden winning the state of Virginia in 2024 on average by 6%. And so with that being said, that's going to be considered a lean margin. But when you factor in other things, for example, like betting markets or expert ratings, which typically favors Democrats, Biden is winning the state on average by roughly 10.5%, which in my opinion, that's not accurate, considering that was his 2020 margin, and he's expected to lose a lot of that support, considering that the governor here endorsed Donald Trump, which the governor is very popular. Glenn Youngkin, I believe, is sitting at currently a 58% approval rating. So maybe that can sway the race in favor of Donald Trump and narrow and tighten up the state of Virginia. But still, at the end of the day, Biden is going to win this by a lean margin. And now, moving on to the state of Minnesota. Joe Biden, on average, according to majority polls out of May, says he's going to win the state by 4 points, considering that you factor in betting markets, expert ratings. His margin increases to 8%, which I would say not really on the accurate side. Biden performed very well in 2020. He won this by 7%. And so probably because he had that BLM momentum, it shifted the Minneapolis suburbs to the left. And also he's going to come down to suburban women. And so with that being said, Biden's going to win the state by a lean margin of 4 points according to the polls in 2024. And now moving on to the deep southern state of Georgia. And so as we all know, Biden flipped this state for any Democrat for the first time since Bill Clinton, I believe. And the main reason why was probably because he got high turn among African-American voters. He could crack nearly 90% among them, in which I don't expect him to do the same thing this time around, considering that his approval rating is below 40%, which is horrible for any president, whether you are on the left or on the right. And so with that being said, I expect him to only get, I would say, 80% among blacks, and if Trump is lucky enough, Biden only gets roughly 70% among them, and Trump is actually polling a fourth among African-American registered voters, so 25%, which is good for any Republican nowadays when we're talking about that specific minority group. And so at the end of the day, current polling averages suggest Trump is on track to win the state by 5%. And considering that this state actually swung 6 points to the left in 2020, and Trump is winning the state according to the polls by 5%, is great news for the former president. And so at the end of the day, he's going to win this by a lean margin in 2024. If the Atlanta suburbs do not perform well for Joe Biden, considering that the margin was just too close, he only won this by roughly 11,000 votes, which is like 0.3%. So this state, I think, in my opinion, would be one of the more easier flips for Donald Trump in 2024. And now moving on to the state of North Carolina. So as of May, according to the polls, Trump is going to win North Carolina by a margin of 6.5%. But when you factor in betting markets and expert ratings, the projected margin comes to a total of 3 points. So that's still good, which is going to be lean at the end of the day. So whether it's 3 or 6 points in the state of North Carolina, Trump is in good shape in this state. And considering that in the 2020 election, when Biden flipped Georgia, Biden flipped Arizona, North Carolina still stayed red for Donald Trump. And that goes to show you that the state is probably going to go in favor of him in 2024. And Republicans have made gains in terms of voter registration. Back in the 2020 election, Democrats led by 391,000. Now in 2024, Democrats only lead by 170,000. So the lead has shrunk in terms of voter registration, and Republicans had made gains. And so main reason why Trump is probably on track to win this state, and that's exactly what the polls are reflecting. And now moving on to the state of Nevada. So as we all know, polls in this state specifically usually tends to overestimate Republican chances. For example, the 2022 midterms, Adam Laxalt severely underperformed the polls. And so with that being said, Donald Trump is winning in Nevada by 4 points on average. But let's say if Trump slightly underperforms, maybe even like 3 points, he still is going to win because 4 minus 3 is obviously 1. And so with that being said, Trump is going to win Nevada at the end of the day by a tilt margin, even if the polls were off. If we had a polling error of 3%, for example, Trump still wins Nevada because he's up on average by 4 points, which is not good news for Joe Biden. And then when we factor in betting markets and expert ratings, obviously the margin gets very close. But Trump is only up by 0.2%. But at the end of the day, if Trump is able to perform well in Washoe, that region of Nevada, or maybe Reno County, if he's able to flip that, he's probably on track to win the state. And if he's able to peel a lot of that support away from Biden in Clark County, basically the Vegas area, I think he is in good shape to win the state. And that's exactly what the polls are suggesting. When we go back to voter registration, Democrats have lost tremendously. Their lead in 2020 was 87,000. Now it has shrunk to just 33,000 in terms of registration, so you can see the trends and the shifts go in favor of Republicans. And Nevada is slightly a right trendy state at the current moment. And now moving on to the state of Arizona, in which it is actually the polar opposite of Nevada. It's actually a left trendy state. Democrats have gained in terms of voter registration in the state of Arizona. Current polling averages actually has Trump winning this state by a greater margin than he did in 2016. On average, Trump is winning Arizona as of May by 4.5%. But when you factor in betting markets, it's basically a tie, and say with expert ratings. But at the end of the day, according to the polls, Trump's going to win Arizona 2024 by a lean margin. A lot of this probably has to do with the border crisis. Just like Texas, Arizona is a border state. And so with that being said, if voters are really impacted by this issue, and they have a negative view of Biden's handling on the border crisis, then Trump is probably on track to win this state, regardless if the state is trending towards the left. Obviously, demographics show that, you have Californians moving to the state, and if they bring their political views with them, they're probably going to vote Democrat. And you just saw they elected a Democratic governor for the first time since, I believe, 2009, Katie Hobbs. And so you can see the trends go in favor of Democrats. And Arizona in the future is going to be a very blue state. But we're talking about, the current election, not the future, the 2024 election, not the 2032 election, in which Arizona is going to go to Donald Trump by a lean margin, according to the polls as of May. And now, moving on to the Rust Belt, before we end out this video, starting off with Wisconsin. Trump is winning this Rust Belt state on average by 3 to 4 points, according to the polls. But when you factor in betting markets, Biden is actually up by 1%, which I think is not that accurate. I mean, come on, guys. Who are these people that actually bet? It's not really something you would trust. And then expert ratings has it a dead tie toss up for either candidate. And so when you add in those three factors, the projected margin comes to a total of 1% lead for Donald Trump, which is actually good for any Republican, because you would typically see in recent elections past a blue wall that no Republican could break. And Trump did it in 2016, but Biden rebuilt it in 2020, and Trump is hoping to break that blue wall once again in the 2024 election, in which he's poised to do so. According to majority polls, Trump is winning Wisconsin by 4%, and considering that this state underestimated Trump by 6 points in 2020, and he's up by 4 points, is not good news for Joe Biden. And now moving on to another fellow Rust Belt state, which neighbors Wisconsin, Michigan, in which you saw it had a large uncommitted vote of roughly 100,000 people voting uncommitted in the Democratic primaries. And that is going to be an issue. And let's say a lot of those people that voted for Biden in 2020 does not turn out for him this time around because of the uncommitted vote. It's going to hurt him in this state. But alone does not mean Trump wins this state. Trump is going to need to do more with that. I think it comes down to places like Detroit, the suburbs here, suburban women, and issues like abortion. So with that being said, Biden can still win Michigan in my opinion, but I think at this point in time, Trump is also on track to win this state according to the polls. Keep in mind, Biden won this state back in 2020 by nearly 3%, but you see a roughly 5% shift to the right in favor of Donald Trump according to 2024 polling averages. As of May, Trump is leading by 2.5%, which is not good news for Joe Biden. When you factor in betting markets, Biden's up by roughly 2.5%. When you factor in expert ratings, Biden's up by only 1%. And so with that being said, it comes to a projected margin of 0.6% on average when you factor in things not just polling averages alone. But in this video specifically, we're only looking at polling averages, which shows Trump is going to win the state by a lean margin in 2024. And now, moving on to the last and final state before we end out this video, Pennsylvania, Biden's home state. He grew up there even though he currently lives in Delaware right now. If the election was held today, Donald Trump wins this state according to polling averages by 2 points. And Biden won the state back in 2020 by roughly 1.2% to be exact. And so with that being said, polls suggest that there's going to be a roughly 3 to 4% swing to the right in favor of Donald Trump. So it comes down to the Philadelphia, Pittsburgh suburbs, typically Democratic strongholds, and if Trump is able to flip Erie County, in which he actually did not perform that well in the primaries, Nikki Haley got a lot of that vote. And keep in mind, I believe it was a closed primary, not an open one, which is not good for Donald Trump. But still, at the end of the day, if the polls were to be right in this scenario, Trump wins Pennsylvania by 2 points, which is going to be considered a tilt-to-lean margin at the end of the day. So this is the finalized map. As of May, according to polling averages, Trump wins the election with 312 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 226, which would send him off to retirement. So, like I mentioned, this is not my actual prediction. This is what the polls say as of May. If the election was held today, Donald Trump wins with his second term. And so with that being said, let me know what states you agree with or disagree with in the comment section down below. And do you trust the polls? And one last final reminder before I close out this video is to subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss out on any of my content. And also, we have memberships, so if you're looking for that, you can find the link in the description section. Thank you everyone for watching.